this is our Gravity Project work group call. We really appreciate having you all on, and we will go ahead and get started with a few administrative items while everyone else gets dialed in. Next slide, please. If you would like to ask questions or pose comments while we are in the middle of the discussion or the presentation, you are more than welcome to use your chat feature. And please send that to everyone so that our team can all see it here and so that other members of the community can possibly respond to your questions. We've had really good chats lately, and we really appreciate you all jumping in with responses when you are able. And we do record these calls, and we do post the recordings online following the meeting, and that's why all of you are currently on mute. But at the discussion points, if you want to unmute yourselves, you can do that on your device, or you can press *6 if you are dial-in only. Next slide, please. If you have not already done so, we encourage you to join the project as either an committed member or an other interested party. And we ask for you to do this because this is our distribution list. And if you joined the project as a member, you will continue to receive emails and communication from us and meeting updates, etc. If you don't know whether you signed up already, you can check your membership status on the wiki, and we will post this presentation following the meeting and send up a follow-up email as well, so that you don't have to frantically scribble this URL while you see it on the screen. And you can find all other project information on the wiki as well. Next slide, please. Today we will review the updated schedule. We've made some modifications to that to account for having canceled the meeting a couple of weeks ago. And then Lisa Nelson will take you through a recap of use cases, use case elements, and the actor transaction diagram. And then she's going to detail message content, what that is, why it's important, and what you will be focusing on in the coming weeks. And then we will cover next steps. Next slide, please. We are here today on week 9, on the 27th of June, and we will review some changes and revisions that have been made to the actor transaction diagrams and use case descriptions that you saw last week. And then Lisa will be going into detail on the message content aspect of the use cases, and that will set us up for transitioning into our data element submission work for when we kick off the food insecurity phase on July 18th. And I'd also like to point out that next week is a holiday, so we have canceled the meeting for next week, and we will resume on July 11th, when Lisa will introduce you to a new web tool that we will be using to collect data element submissions. And that tool will replace the spreadsheet that has been posted on the wiki in the past weeks and that many of you have already submitted, and thank you for that. If you're in the process of populating one of those spreadsheet templates, don't worry, you can continue to use it and submit it, but we will be encouraging all of you to use that web tool following the meeting on the 11th to submit your data element concepts for food insecurity and for housing access and for transportation. Next slide, please. And this is a snapshot of the end of July and through August. And Evelyn walked through the schedule during our call last week, so I don't want to spend too much time here, so we can allow Lisa to start walking through use case revisions. Next slide, please. And Lisa, at this point, I will hand things off to you.
Thank you, Lynette. Before I start the review session for today, I wanted to thank everyone who has taken the time to submit their comments and revisions as part of the Patient Story 1, Rebecca Smith's story, and given us input on the 3 use cases. We really appreciate it. I'm going to recap a little bit of what we've done, so if you're new or just to help reinforce it, we have identified 3 use cases to explain the information exchange that's needed to accomplish data sharing goals within the context of our Patient Story 1, the goals that we have for the Gravity Project. These 3 use cases were developed to exist as standalone SDH data sharing use cases that really are usable regardless of the patient story. but we use that patient story to flesh them out initially. Use case 1 is relevant to how coded social determinant of health screening and diagnosis data are captured as part of a patient encounter and how the data is gathered and collected into clinical systems. SDH data are documented as a part of the screening activity, and diagnosis data is documented as part of a clinician's assessment activity. Use case 2 is focused on taking actions in response to screening and diagnosis information that's collected regarding health concerns or social risks in an electronic health record system. And the information may be, that information might be the reason for ordering or referring or performing additional SDH intervention activities. These actions can include counseling, education, consults, referrals, case management, care planning, modifications to the treatment plan, etc. The primary focus of this use case is to show how the ordered or referred activities are tracked all the way to completion. And then finally, use case 3, which is different again. It builds on the previous 2, but it involves the gathering and the aggregation of data for use in upstream or downstream activities such as population health management, quality reporting, and risk adjustment or risk stratification. So a nice mixture of 3 different use cases going on there. We've established several terms that might be new to some of you. Evelyn spent time last week explaining why use cases are developed, and it gave you information around the use of these technical actor roles that you see over here as a part of how we get from specifics and details of a story into a generalized or usable sort of use case that is independent of all those details and can be utilized by any system that could play the technical actor roles. And today I'm going to highlight a couple of areas where we've made some improvements since last week, and then we'll go into the new material about message content. If you recall, we've established this common template for expressing the use cases in a pictorial way, and we feel like this is a nice way to consistently get the understanding of what the use case is about, so that you have both a verbal way of understanding it through the words and then also this nice diagram to give you a good picture of what's going on. And with that, I will branch us into looking at the document. I'm going to go over some of the input that we received and what our feedback is around that, just to kind of keep the community consensus building going and to demonstrate that even though we're challenged by this WebEx world that we live in, that we're really working through this in a collaborative way, have show you a little bit about the feedback that's been given in and how we're responding. And then I'll just mention some of the other editorial changes and some of the revisions we've made to make those actor transaction tables attach a little bit better with the information. So let me see if I can get us into the document easily. And here we are up in the patient story, and I'm just going to buzz by this by using the comment button here to get us into the area of where the use cases were developed. And here is the first one around gathering SDH data in conjunction with a patient encounter. Specifically, Donna Rugg had written in about clarifying that the EHR is that it's system assigned to get some of these IDs that are used to pre-populate the questionnaire so that it is findable and has some attached information that's relevant to the patient already. That is a system function. It's not something that the user would be doing manually. And so we made some changes in the editorial here to clarify that a little bit more. We hope that will be effective. The next bit of feedback we got was around the notion of the order filler, rejecting an order or a request. There's an alternate flow in the use case that's focused on how we track to completion activities that have been ordered or requested. And I think Helene says there are multiple rules under here based on the type of rejection, and goes on the rejection due to additional documentation needs for medical necessity. Supplier may submit requests for additional documents without rejecting the entire order, and in some cases there could be supplemental components needed, such as for device, I think it's called durable medical equipment, DMEs, that might be a part of that. And I appreciate the feedback here, but I think that these workflows are can become very complex. And for this phase of the Gravity project, where we're focused on developing codes that allow us to discreetly represent and add coded information around the activities of screening and diagnosis and treatment and planning, the focus of what we're doing needs to be kept on these data elements. And I think that without going into the complexity of these kinds of workflows, which I think would take us a little bit astray from that, I don't think that we will get into the deeper details of these alternative flows. It's really just to help us have a context to focus on the task at hand, at least for right now, which is developing value sets that we can use to represent the needed information. And this is a little bit of a similar notion. We get into looking at the order delivered as opposed to the request completion. And this is an interesting question around whether these words, these notions of completing requests are familiar and seem to be attached to what it is that we're trying to do in this use case that's about tracking activities to completion. So my feedback on this one is that the key to this, and I think Lucy Johns brought this up last or maybe 2 weeks ago, the focus being really about completing and tracking to completion. So I think the keyword completion is really important here. And I wanted to bring up the issue of whether we're more comfortable focusing on the word order or the word request. Request may not be as natural when we think about ordering, and I have tried to use the pair, ordering and requesting, almost like merged together to try and blend this notion together. But I wanted to point out that in FHIR, there is no notion of an order. They have completely developed their request workflow pattern around this notion of a request. And so the reason why we've echoed that word request is to really reinforce in people's minds that in this space of asking for things to be done and then tracking them to completion, although we carry the word order throughout, and it certainly is applicable to things that are ordered, I really do feel like the words request completion will be more useful to us than the distraction of trying to change that into thinking about something as specific as an order. That's my feedback on that one. Clinicians have noted that they are more interested about when the order is actually received and being used by the patient versus when the order has just been filled and might still be sitting in a pharmacy and not delivered to home yet. So here, Helene, I think that, again, the word order tends to put our minds into the space of pharmacy, and we're trying to use this request pattern for all kinds of activities that may be ordered or requested in the SDH space, much broader than just the pharmacy notion of orders. And so, again, I think that the workflow statuses that are associated with medication orders, they are super complex. It's a whole topic in and of itself to go through the phases of sort of what's the prescription, what's the order, what's the dispense and the fill, pharmacy workflows are very complex, and digging into those take us, again, away from the task at hand, which is developing coded terminology, language and vocabulary in the code space for expressing the kinds of activities that are ordered or referred in the social determinant of health space. So again, I'm going to stick with this notion of request and try and keep us out of the weeds of complex medication orders at this point in time. Next comment was around, it's in another use case, but in a similar place. Actually, this is me. I picked this up when I did a copy and a paste, and so I'll touch on this in just a minute when I get back to this slide. I wanted to point out two other things. One is in the area of improvements in the way that we use the shading and the coloring. So Evelyn talked last week about the way that we are indicating human users as well as organizations that user is working for, and then the systems that they are using to interact with the information, and separating that away from these abstracted technical actor roles that we develop in the use case. So you can see how we've used the light gray, the medium gray, and white to represent that. And one of the things we did just to reinforce that in the use cases is we've again echoed that same color up here in the actor tables. So human actors and business actors are in that light gray. We've got a dark gray here for the systems that might be involved, and then ultimately in the white where we've developed generic technical actor roles. And the last point that I wanted to make is you'll notice I put all of this in simple markup mode, but when you look at it in all markup, there are quite a few editorial changes that we've made throughout to improve wording and clarify things a little bit based on some of the feedback that we've received. So I definitely suggest this is a good time to pick this document back up off from the Confluence site and have another read of it to stay up with what's changing and see if there's any other feedback that you'd like to provide at this time. With that, I will take questions on, does anybody have any trailing questions right now about the progress that we've been making around the actor transaction diagrams and the use cases? Lynette, I think we could probably go 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not sure how many people have questions at this point, or if this is about the third week that we've covered some of this, so everybody's probably on the same page, but let's just break for a second and see if anybody would like to ask any other questions. Okay, if not, I am going to get into the meat. Lynette, can you confirm for me that the chat's okay too, that folks don't have questions there?
Yep.
Good?
Oh, go ahead.
Yes, no, it's Evelyn. I was going to say no chats.
Okay, super. So then with that, I will move on to today's new topic, which is digging in on message content. And my picture here is to show you some trains that are carrying cargo. And I think this is a really good illustration for thinking about what we tend to call the transaction payload. We've snuck that term in already in our template diagram that we have. You will run into that term in the standards world quite a lot because there's work that's done in the transactions that share information between systems. And then, of course, there is the information that gets carried along with that transaction that is moving stuff from place to place. So I think that the train analogy here really helps to demonstrate and helps us to understand that when we think about the transactions, we're thinking about the movement of information from one place to another. And when we think about the message content, we're thinking about the payload that's inside that transaction that's being delivered from one system to another. So that's how we'll connect that. I'm going to try and use that term message content, but it's pretty much synonymous with the transaction payload. This next slide is a set of really important links that I'm going to introduce you to today. It has to do with one of our primary principles in the Gravity project, and that is that we will leverage existing and emerging standards in all of our work. This is really a key to the success that we hope for this project, is to connect the work that we do with establishing coded data elements with larger and existing projects that are already going on within HL7 and in other venues to establish standards that help us achieve health information interoperability. So today I am going to encourage you to familiarize yourself with some of these available resources. And to make it a little bit less scary, I've opened some of them up so that you can just get used to what you see when you go there. I'll give you a little brief introduction to a few of them here right now. So the first place I wanted to go is to the main FHIR page that will give us resources. And let me see, I think I zoomed right by where I wanted to go right here. So if you go to hl7.org/FHIR, it brings you to the main landing page for the FHIR standard. And this menu item called Resources is a place that I would encourage you to get used to. There is a tremendous amount of information that is documented about FHIR already, and from this one simple website link, hl7.org/FHIR, you can navigate the whole standard of FHIR. Lots that you can learn this way. The resource place is the home where you index into all of the different FHIR resources that have been defined so far. Structural elements for moving data around. These content modules are all defined one click away. They're organized and categorized on this tab, and then if you know a resource by name, you can look it up alphabetically right here. And just knowing how to get to this place really opens up a whole world of possibilities for understanding FHIR a little bit better. That's the first place I wanted to take you to. The next place that I wanted to take you to is the area in FHIR where implementation guides are defined. Oh, I got to back up. Implementation guides for FHIR. This is extra guidance on top of the base standard that implementer communities are beginning to write and develop that show you how to use FHIR for very specific use cases. And at the bottom of that main home page, you scroll down here, and there's a link that's for the implementation guide registry. And this registry takes you to a couple of implementation guides that are relevant for our work with social determinants of health. The U.S. Core Implementation Guide. This is where many of the data elements that are already named in the draft U.S. CDI, Core Data for Interoperability, they've been modeled and implementation guidance is in terms of profiles, sort of the narrowing and rules on how you use a certain FHIR resource to share information in a specific way for the U.S. core use case. That's all there. And this implementation guide right here called CCDA on FHIR, this is the implementation guide that tells you basically how to do FHIR documents that align and match with all of the work that has been developed already in consolidated CDA for the 11 different document types for clinical notes that have already been established and are used. So these implementation guides, once you go there, they all have a look and feel that's similar to this, and pretty easy reading, very linkable, and it's where you go to get to all of the profile definitions that further constrain the FHIR resources. I wanted to also show you the CDA product page. This is an older sort of version of how information is distributed through HL7, but HL7 has what's called the master grid on their product area, and the master grid is where you go to bring up this CDA implementation guide one-stop shopping page. It has links and access to all of the consolidated CDA implementation guides. You can see here that this is the current version, 2.1, and in the 2.1 there have been some updates and errata packages that have been developed. You can get to the current version right here. And then there are some supplemental guides that have additional templates that have been developed for use with consolidated CDA, and they are all documented right there. And then the value sets that go along with consolidated CDA, very relevant to the kind of work that we're doing. Those value set expansions are available on the VSAC, and this link takes you to places where you can download those terminologies that we use with the standard. Finally, I think the last thing I wanted to show you is I put a link to the dental attachments reference, and you might be asking yourself, why is she showing us dental information? I wanted to demonstrate that we are not the only community who is working on doing this type of work to say, how do we take our domain of information and utilize existing standards to transport and share the kind of information that's relevant to us. And so this document I'm showing because it's a good example of another group in a different domain, but how they have utilized existing standards, existing space of models and templates and profiles that are already out there to make use of CDA documents, or just the same for FHIR documents. It's this, swap out this acronym, the same sort of structure of a document that has header information and then sections with discrete entry representation. They're working with all of those same concepts, and they've done a great deal of work to dig in and understand different document types and what kinds of section content is specified to be used and available in there. And they have done work to go through and specifically look at the details. For example, in the header of a CCDA document, there are very prescriptive fields that are already developed and available, like how to represent the patient's name and their medical record ID, their social security number, address, telephone, administrative gender, date of birth. All of this information is, it's not a new trail that we need to cut here at all. It's just about us understanding what is available, what are some of the structures called and named, what kind of information is available, to know that we've already figured out how you represent the provider's NUCC provider classification code and what value set you use to do that, and how do you talk about the address of their practice and other things that are also relevant to when we collect social determinant of health information. So I just wanted to show that there's a lot that can be used already, and that we're not the only group who is doing this kind of work. And so this information, I didn't go through two here. There's mapping information that's available for how you technically go between the details of templates that are defined in CDA and profiles that are defined in FHIR. Some very good work that's been done to standardize and make progress on how those two things fit together. And, of course, some really relevant work that's done in the Da Vinci project space and is under ballot right now around how to do clinical data exchange, both for document-based paradigms and data-based paradigms. And so I encourage people to make yourselves aware of this foundational knowledge, because it's very important to us in terms of utilizing what's available already. So shift gears and talk now specifically about our approach for looking at message content. And my first point is that we want to connect our envisioned message content needs to these available notions of document and data structures that are already available in profiles and templates that are out there. We want to utilize work that's already been patterned and done for the headers of these documents so that we can make use of very basic FHIR structures, CDA structures that already give us a lot of data element structure around the individuals and the entities that may be involved in the context of sharing this information. We want to fuse the best of what we have today with the promise of what's coming for tomorrow with FHIR. There's just so much good work that has been done already that does not need to be discarded, and that's why we need to make sure that we're building up our capacity to understand what's out there and available to us already. I will just, have a seat, prepare yourself. It is overwhelming when you first get into understanding what's available today. It is very complex and detailed, and it will feel overwhelming when you first get started. Just the range of materials that I took you through to introduce you to those different spots to start looking at that, I know it will feel like a lot at first, but it's really only overwhelming when it's new. Once you become familiar with the terms and the template names and some of the profile names, it stops feeling so hard, and it begins to feel like a large palette of paints that you can use to color your world with data exchange patterns that you want to use, and they're readily available right there already. So just trust me that once you get in there and start to become familiar with it, it will feel less overwhelming. But it is important to note that these details matter, and it's just as important to be comfortable getting into the details as it is to stay firm with remembering the big picture of what our goals are here for why we are looking to code social determinant of health data. Remember, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. If it's not coded, it didn't happen. In the world we live in today, that's just the reality of what we have to try and accomplish. And with that, I didn't want to show you that. With that, I want to break into the new content that we've added into the document. So besides doing another read of the Word document with respect to looking at the improvements we've made on the use cases, you will notice that you'll bump into an area where the pagination turns to landscape mode, and this is where I've started to document new material to support thinking about the message content, that important box that's on the arrow in our diagram. I'm going to take this out of markup mode so that we don't have all that distraction. And the place I started is to launch off from those use cases. You'll notice here in the left-hand column that we're tying back to the 3 use cases that we're working from and the 6 named transactions that we've identified so far. I just harvested the description of the message content out of those use cases so that you could see it stacked up right here in one little diagram. This is what helps us start to think about what are the data needs that we have for these use cases. The next panel takes that one step further and moves that right-hand column into the left-hand side. Now we're looking at the verbal description of what the message content needs to be. And we're starting to bump up against what are some of our options that are available today, both in CDA and FHIR, in terms of FHIR-based resources that could help us represent and maybe, in fact, have established patterns already for representing information that's relevant to what we need to do. So I pulled out key terms and words that will help you find your way in terms of templates that are available in the CDA world and resources that are available in the FHIR world to think about how we would start to share this content. On the right-hand side, I tried to go a little bit deeper to encourage us to think about, well, what is the data that we're really putting in these kinds of these templates, these profiles. So we've got the assessment information. Those are the questionnaires, kind of the question-answer patterns that we looked at that we're looking at identifying in the assessment activity, and both in terms of how they're laid out as a form to be answered, and then actually gathered answers as the patient's answers are filled out for that question and answer information for the assessment. Here in the second use case, we look at activities that need to be referred and ordered. Maybe there's some background assessment information that might need to be shared along with that to explain or identify and pass along some of the background information that was collected during the assessment phase, and possibly some identified needs or risks. Diagnoses is the term that we're using, that would need to be recorded to be the reason why these activities might be ordered or referred. So I've identified that that's the kind of information that's being passed here. And in the response, the completion of the request part, that's really where we get into how would we share information that a task got done. How do we articulate which activities were completed with respect to the ones that were ordered and referred, so that we're using a common vocabulary and common way of representing that so that we can close the loop on understanding what has been completed. And there could potentially be other information, maybe notes, progress notes or consultation notes that explain more about what else was looked at or what progress is being made on the task. Maybe it's not all the way done yet, but we want to communicate that progress is being made. So I identified that there might be some additional notes or information that might need to pass along with that. And then finally, in our last use case that is more focused on gathering up this information for other upstream and downstream uses, we identified the need to share aggregate coded data. And most commonly, patterns that are available for doing that right now in the CDA side, it's something called a QRDA Category 3 document. On the FHIR side, there's a resource called Measure Report. And really what's passing is already computed quality measure information. These are scores that are relevant for a certain population or a given measurement definition, and that's the kind of information that's being shared in that transaction, aggregate stuff, as opposed to the idea of sharing core clinical information that ultimately can be worked on, computed over, looked at for assessed downstream or upstream, depending on which way you want to look at it, to come to their own conclusions about measures and risk stratification, et cetera. So in this case, the information that's being shared is not the aggregate information, but the base clinical data. And here you're sharing actual encounter summaries, patient summaries, or maybe what's called a Category 1 QRDA quality report document architecture, a file that's specifically data elements that are relevant for measures but gathered up on a patient-by-patient basis. Or on the FHIR world, they have another way of using that measure report for this patient-level information, as well as supporting encounter and patient summary type documents. So here, it is the full range of information that we're talking about: screening information, assessed needs and diagnoses, goals, planned interventions, completed interventions, and outcome observations about how much progress is being made towards some of those goals. That's really where you see the full range of data elements that we're talking about being shared so that ultimately the information recipient can process over this for research, for quality, for a variety of needs. So that is, kind of my first level of digging into the details, moving from the use case to looking at some available patterns and asking us to be more specific about the types of data that need to be shared. From there, I dug deeper, and the document will provide additional background to give you visibility into sort of a moderate step toward those detailed resources that I'm encouraging you to go and look at and become familiar with yourselves. But I pulled out some specific information to help you understand a bit of a primer and think about when we talk about documents, what do we really mean? So here's the schematic for understanding that there is an aggregate collection of information that's organized to have a prescriptive and very common header type of templated information on it, and then information that's broken into standardized structured sections that help us navigate through the big collection of data that is shared in one of these documents. So I give you a little bit of background on that. It's really meant to be a bit of a primer for some of the core concepts that we'll be using and thinking about as we move towards or envisioning what our message content would be. This notion of open templates and open profiles that although profiling work and templating work gives you instructions on minimum expectations and things that you must do or should do, the full range of these base standards are available and can be used. The open template is a way of saying that we're not prevented from doing more and using more of the base standards. We're just using these templates and profiles as a starting point. I get into explaining a little bit more about thinking on sections and understanding the work that's been done in the past to categorize chunks of information using LOINC codes and a coding paradigm called the LOINC document ontology that helps us to think about chunks of information and at least begin to code what things belong in these big buckets that you can think of as like SOAP notes. And I put a little schematic in to help you think about these structured sections in terms of how they align with that SOAP framework that was established by Dr. Larry Weed, many of us know, around subjective, objective assessment and plan information. So here in this document now, you basically get an introduction to thinking all the way through to the discrete data entries and FHIR resources that are available at this like lowest level of data representation. And I bring you to understand an important data type that's called codable concept and provide some background and details on understanding what a codable concept data type actually is. I pull out a couple of examples, a notion around gender that is a code like this, and how value sets get established to kind of constrain the notions, the coded concepts that can be used. Another example around marital status, so you can see and understand the difference between required value sets and extensible value sets. There's a whole terminology for understanding that. So there's background information about that. And then finally, I land with the deepest digging that will be done in this document, and that is to expose for you data elements that you'll recognize by name, such as data elements that you would find in the patient part of the header, called the record target, or the author part, et cetera, and point you straight to U.S. core profiles that have already been established to identify how to represent those kind of component pieces. So that's what's in the document so far, a lot of an introduction to get you down into the weeds, down into the details there. And that brings me to the slide that I wanted to land on, which is that we're asking you to really adopt two views simultaneously and merge together this thinking around the big picture and our goal for developing a way to discreetly code social determinant of health data so that we do have the ability to accomplish use cases like these three that we've drawn out, the value proposition around being able to move ourselves to a position like that, and at the same time be prepared to dig into the details that we need to intimately work with the data and understand the technical details of representing data that way. So it's kind of like when they give you the two different contact lenses and you can be both nearsighted and farsighted at the same time. That's what we're pressing this group to do. It's the kind of thinking, the kind of knowledge that we have to do the next phase of our work, which is getting into specifying these data elements that ultimately will be packaged up and used in standards in the ways that I've kind of demonstrated for you today. So the takeaways before we jump into questions for the end of the day is that information that is represented in this part of the document, when you go in and now look at the landscape part that's been added, this information represents the potential existing patterns that are available. I really only came upon one place where I needed to suggest that we might want to have a new SDH section, kind of a SDH status section that might make sense, but mostly we've used all materials patterns that are available already. But it just represents a potential to look at doing this. The message content materials, they're really a reference to assist us with this task at hand of identifying coded data. We might need to look at what some of our potential uses are so that we can understand when we're making decisions about, is this a data element we need or we don't need? How is it going to be used? We might need to be able to reach into some of these patterns to help us make decisions. We are not specifying what will be the standardized templates that we will be using. That is not the work that we're doing right now. We're simply trying to agree and get on the same page in terms of what is possible for making use of these codes once they come into existence as value sets that are available for the community to use. And finally, I will make a pitch. It's throughout the document when you read what's been added, but this important notion to remember that human readable information is as much a part of this as discretely coded information. And it's important as we try and navigate through these new waters to remember that the human readable information is a really important anchor point for us, because ultimately if you get a bunch of coded data and you can't figure out what it means, then it's not helpful. And the meaning is rooted in what the human information, human readable, humanly consumable information is that goes along with these codes. So we have to be mindful of what we're creating in terms of what it means for human readability as well as for discrete coding. And I think with that, Linnell, we'd like to break into a Q&A session until the top of the hour. Lynette, can you guide us or maybe help with the chat if you can to see what kind of questions people are interested in asking?
Actually, Lisa, it's Evelyn. I can do it. I know Lynette has been having trouble with her audio. So I'll just ask Lynette if she can mute. But let's start with questions. I do want to address Corey Smith's first question here, which I think is very important, again, given all the content you just walked through. So Corey is asking, what specific artifacts do we think we will be producing within the current Gravity scope? So I'm assuming this is phase 1. Is it value sets that can be bound to one or more FHIR release 4 profiles or CCDA version 2.2 or above, or one or more FHIR R4 profiles or extensions to SNOMED or implementation guides?
Evelyn, do you want me to just take a whack at that, or do you want to take a first pass at it?
Sure. I will just clarify again, our scope for phase one, as Lisa noted here, we're not specifying what standardized templates or profiles we will use. So for phase one, we are focused on defining these data concepts. What should these data sets be? What should the value sets be? We will identify coding gaps and produce a series of recommendations. But for phase two, that's when we'll start doing a deeper dive on how those gets to the second question, how value sets can be bound to FHIR profiles. And you've already started to initially, Lisa, your presentation is introducing that, because there are, as you said, existing CCDA templates and sections and FHIR resources that can represent these concepts already. And we are also on point to develop a FHIR implementation guide. And Lisa, please clarify.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to think about it. I can't tell you the number of times that I run into standards that you think they're fully baked, and you download a published piece of work and you get in there and it says LOINC code XXX, to be determined, and you think to yourself, how in the world does this happen? And what we are trying to do is change the order in which work gets done, so that we are engaging the code system vendors and the organizations that give us the coded terminology, clarifying within a community what's really needed to be coded, where the value is, what data elements need, and do that work first, so that we do have a good collection of codes and value sets that are associated with data element concepts, and then we will move into the next phase. We will be simultaneously feathering in the progress towards having a FHIR implementation guide. As a part of the FHIR Acceleration Program, the Gravity Project will be heading in that direction, and so at the tail end of our work, the work that will begin phase two will already have been started to move in that direction. So Corey, you're reading the tea leaves, I think, in the right direction, but phase one is focused on data concepts and coming up with recommendations that will go back to CPT and SNOMED and LOINC for spots where there are no codes or codes that need to be straightened out, so that we get all that house in order before we move into the next phase.
Thank you, Lisa. I do have, we have another question, several. I think it's clarifying. We've got several participants that are talking through, we're asking questions in regards to the documents, the links that you shared. So can you explain, I guess, and we have them as part of our next steps and homework, like how Gravity participants can review those documents, the links that you walk through, all the existing standards.
Sure.
So, please.
Sure. All of these links will take you to places that are publicly accessible. If you click on this, it takes you straight into hl7.org, that FHIR, that place that I showed you to. It's open. You don't have to be an HL7 member even to get access to any of that. Same with the FHIR profiles. Some of the CDA work, you need to have a HL7 account. It's a free account you can get, but you have to be registered with HL7, and the products, when you go to download them, ask you to agree to a license for that. But but the hassle of doing it, there's no impairment to prevent you from getting straight access to this. The companion guide work is under ballot right now, and so the same thing. You have to be logged in with an HL7 account in order to access that. And all the rest of these are posted on Confluence, which you have access to already. If you're participating in the Confluence site for Gravity, you already have what you need to get access to those. So the PowerPoint, today's PowerPoint is downloadable. These links are hot. You can click right on them. And then the biggest thing is just allocating the time to familiarize yourself with the documents that are available. Every bit of standard work you can make comments about. Back through HL7 has a process that you can always participate and comment, even on these base resources that exist already.
We had got a question from Jennifer saying it'd be helpful what the takeaway should be by exploring each site. So just, Lisa, if you want to reiterate that these do have, as you said, coded concepts, have definitions on what those mean.
Yeah. I think the main takeaway, if I was going to take an approach to how to, what to familiarize myself with, I would download the Word document that has been accumulated, and I would look at the material that I've given in here as a primer, and then utilize those documents to delve one layer deeper into this material. So if you, I'm going to get to some of the resource names here. These tables that give you clues about what fire resources are relevant, I would say here's a good activity. Go see if you can find the communication request, or go see if you can find questionnaire or observation, composition. If you get to the point that you can navigate into the fire standard and find one of these profiles, or find, I'll just take you back here again, hl7.org/fire. If you, oops, I did something wrong, hl7.org/fire. Here's a resource, and if you don't know what category it's in, go for alphabetical, and let's just pick one. I want to pick observation because it's just a good general resource to know about. So here's observation. Click on that and read through, see what it tells you. What kind of information is available? What level of detail does a fire resource include? How does it get to you? Can I start to feel comfortable? Look, here's a category that's a codable concept. Do I understand what that means in terms of how vocabulary plugs in to fire models? Doing a few activities like that, maybe going from our Word document that introduces message content to one level deeper of, can I get into a spec and can I navigate my way around to some things that Lisa has pointed out are relevant or will be relevant for social determinants of health. That's what I would encourage you to do.
Thanks, Lisa. I know we want to spend some time on next steps.
Can I just ask a quick question first?
Yes, Lucy.
Please? Thank you. The tagline for this whole project really is devil in the details, and I think Lisa's grasp of the details is quite extraordinary. So thank you, Lisa, for that. I wanted to ask about other organizations or activities delving into the substance of the data that we want to concentrate on, like EPIC and all of their work to enable their clients to deal with social determinants. Is that within our universe, or it's private sector, so we don't really consider it authoritative?
Thank you, Lucy. This is Evelyn. We do have on our Confluence page, we do have one where it's relevant projects, initiatives, sites, where we do list if there are other projects, and we ask the participants, the community, to send us any relevant links. We are agnostic right now to what the vendors are including in their systems. Really, we're encouraging everyone, if you are using, for example, whether you're using an EPIC or another EHR system, and they have defined their own data sets, and you're using them within your organization to document and share social risk data, please include them in your data element submissions. You have an opportunity to indicate where that's coming from. If it's inherent to your EHR system, or if you're using a specific screening tool, you have an opportunity to include that, and so that will be part of our overall review. But we're not looking at one specific vendor's data sets or one specific screening tool.
I guess I would ask why not, because Lisa's message is we don't have to reinvent wheels. So why aren't you?
So our challenge with what's out there within the vendors, if they have standards, so the vendors have also indicated that in some cases they are using codes, and that's where we will look at and see if they are using an existing code, and we'll harmonize along that. So again, we're all including everyone submit what they have, and then we look at everything all together. The challenge is that just because not everyone's using the same EHR system, so we cannot assume that they are using the same or defining the concepts the same way. And we want to get to a point that we're agnostic to the system. We just look at the standards.
But then you're going to have to overcome resistance from the actual thousands of coders or thousands of vendors to use what we come up with, right?
I think it's a good point, Lucy. Actually, let me think about that a little bit more. We have a lot of opportunities when we engage with the vendor community through FHIR Connect-a-thons and CDA implementation-a-thons, and as we get our work together, I think that is a good challenge to think about how to expose the EHR vendors to it and collaborate with them as well. We're getting close to the top of the hour. I'm just sensitive to time.
Thank you. Yep, I was just going to say, and we want to thank all the EHR vendors that are participating. So that's why we open this up and it's a public forum. So with that, I know we're 1 minute past the hour. I want to end with reminding everyone we have no meeting next week. All our information, all our data elements, everything we walk through is on our landing page. And a reminder to everyone, you do receive an email following this meeting. So on Fridays, you get an email reminding you that these slides and the Word document or whatever artifact we review is posted with the direct link. So you do get that every Friday. Stay tuned for that, and you will get a link to this presentation and the Word document that Lisa just walked through. Also, we want to acknowledge that next week we will be publishing what we call begin end-to-end use case document review. So next Friday, we will put the consolidated use case package together, and we'll open it up. You'll get another email, even on July 5th, letting you know that's ready for review. So for those that are working and on vacation next week, we encourage you to review what we send tomorrow and provide us with comments next week. And then for the following week, we'll start end-to-end document review. So thank you, everyone. I know we've got we can address the comments offline or via email. Again, our email's here, gravityproject@enmiadvisors.net. Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll try to address the comments that are coming in offline. But again, thank you, everyone, for your participation today, and have a lovely July 4th holiday week. Thank you.